Welcome to the Upper Cumberland Reporter Coaches Show. I'm your host, Noah McKay, and I'm thrilled to be joined weekly now by Buddy Pearson. You can hear him weekly on the Cookeville High School football broadcast on News Talk 107.7 and 1400 The Hub. So, Buddy, thanks for joining us this week on the Coaches Show.
Well, Noah, you're quickly becoming a giant in the sports industry here in Cookeville, but it is a pleasure to be here, and you do a great job, so does UC Reporter, and all I know is it's finally football season.
Yes, it absolutely is. It's hard to believe that we're already now approaching week one. We're at week one. Tomorrow night, the season gets started with Cookeville Upperman. We're going to be previewing the entire week one set of games around the Upper Cumberland, so that's still to come. But first, I figured it'd be a good idea to introduce ourselves, tell a little bit about ourselves, since we're going to be on their computer screens every week. So I am Noah McKay. You've seen me on the play-by-play here on the Upper Cumberland Reporter. I have a degree in journalism from Tennessee Tech, and I've been working up here as a sports writer for 2.5 years. That's the short version of me. Buddy, how about yourself?
Well, I've been around sports here in the Upper Cumberland for about 20 years. I was the sports editor and managing editor at the Herald-Citizen, and now I'm news and communications director at Tennessee Tech. But in my spare time, I do like to do the play-by-play for Cookeville High football on News Talk 107.7 and 1400 The Hub.
Absolutely. So let's get right into it. It's week one. There's a lot to talk about, a lot of really good games on the slate.
To start off with.
Absolutely. So let's start out in Monterey. Sale Creek coming to play Monterey. The Wildcats get their season started on Friday night at home. Kickoff set for 7 p.m. And I think let's set it up with this. I think Monterey is one of the least talked about teams right now in the Upper Cumberland, but there's a lot of good things going on top of the plateau for Monterey. Sale Creek was 2-8 last year. Monterey 5-6, but they round out the season winning 4 out of 5. A lot of returning starters, 6 preseason all-region players, so talent all over the field for the Wildcats. How do you assess this matchup?
Well, first of all, you can't hardly get to Sale Creek from here. I went there and covered a sub-state softball game with Monterey back years ago, so I'm surprised they even have a football team now. But, Monterey is one of those teams where you kind of forget about them on the mountain. The Wildcats, Coach Scott Hughes, continues to put together quality teams, and they just always have a brutal schedule or play in a brutal region. And so they don't get the hype, and they don't really compile a lot of wins like some of the other schools in the Upper Cumberland do. But this could be the sleeper of the Upper Cumberland because Monterey, as you said, has 6 all-region players back. They've got tons of talent at the skill positions. And, I think this is going to be a great way for Monterey to start out the 2019 season with a win up there on the mountain, because I don't think Sale Creek is going to be very good. And Scott Hughes, again, 29-27 overall as the Wildcats head coach. And again, playing some tough competition. They play in a tough region. They are, I'd say we call them a sleeper, but the people in their region picked them to finish 6th, tied with Joe Burns. And they played Joe Burns at home this year. So Monterey's really looking at maybe possibly hosting a playoff game, finishing in one of those top 2 spots in their region. And if that would happen, I tell you what, that would be great for their program.
Absolutely. And like I mentioned, they finished out the season last year 4 out of 5 wins, but they start 0-4. They ran a gauntlet at the beginning of their schedule in 2018. You look at the 2019 slate, it's not as daunting of a schedule to start out. There's a lot of wins there on the schedule, it appears, at least in the preseason. So let's take a look at them on the field. Obviously, it starts at the quarterback position with Jordan Key. He's a dual-threat quarterback, which is a common theme nowadays, especially in the Upper Cumberland, all sorts of those. But he really came into his own last year, first-year starter. And by the end of the year, he was really slinging the ball around the yard. He has Kevin Borjas, who's a 2-sport athlete, on the outside as a wide receiver, and Anthony Soberanis at the running back position. So they've got a lot of good skill players on the offensive side of the ball that can really help them. In a game like this game right here, where they want to make a statement early in the year, they love nothing more to be able to run up the score in the first game of the year. And guys like that is going to help them to do that.
Well, Borjas, 6'4", 210 pounds. I mean, and for that single-A football, that is a huge player. And you got him out as a playmaker. He might be a wideout, but, you can throw that 50-50 ball up to him, and there's probably not a defensive back that he's going to go up against that's going to have the size that he has.
And you talk about him, that's a great example of the kid who's put the work in. Because a couple years ago, he's playing on the basketball team, but he's coming off the bench. He's a real lanky kid, and then last year he really started to fill out. You could tell he got into the weight room, was really good in one-on-ones against coverage, and Jordan Key is more than a good enough quarterback to get him the ball, which is very important. A lot of 1A schools don't have that. Even good 1A schools, will only have a good running back or one good receiver. They've got good players all over the field. Anthony Soberanis is another guy at the running back spot. So you can't just stop the pass against Monterey. You're going to have to stop both of them. And most of the teams on their schedule likely aren't going to be able to do that at the 1A level.
Yeah, when you've got all region players at the quarterback, running back, and wide receiver positions, I mean, you've already won up the field right there. And then when you look at their schedule, they're at home, obviously starting out against Sale Creek. And and then they go to Lookout Valley and Red Bowling Springs. Those could be 2 wins right there. Then you come home for like a 4-game stretch where they host Harriman, Pickett County, Jackson County, and Joe Burns in that pivotal Region 4 1A matchup. And then they go to Bledsoe County, host Clay County, and then they wrap up the season with Gordonsville, who has been the giant in that region pretty much since time has existed.
Yeah, and it's funny, it's kind of flipped for Monterey. It's always a difficult region, but Gordonsville has been at the top of the region for years. They won a state championship a few years ago, but they lose Braxton Gibbons, their star running back. They have a good quarterback coming back. He's a freshman this year who played as an 8th grader last year, but perhaps an opening in the region there. Clay County's got a good squad. Joe Burns always good, but there's an opening in the region this year for Monterey for the first time in, I think, a very long time, where they have a chance to actually make a run. And that stretch of 4 games where they come home is going to be pivotal for them, because it's some lighter competition on the front end, and then you end up with Gordonsville. But if they can run some wins together in that middle part of the season, I think they're looking very good, like you said, to host a playoff game. And you host a playoff game, that gives you a good chance to win a playoff game, which would be a great thing for Scott Hughes' squad.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
All right, so now let's move on to the second game. Mark Frazier gets his tenure underway with White County. They host Cannon County. Of course, it hasn't been great times for White County lately. They're on a 24-game losing streak. It's been quite a while since there's been optimism, but talking to Coach Frazier on the Coaches Show a few weeks ago, it's a different feel around the program. He's changed some stuff in the field house and the locker rooms to get the kids invested in playing football again. So things are looking up, and perhaps a winnable game with Cannon County.
Well, I've known Mark Frazier for a long time. We play a lot of golf together. I know he's a good golfer. I just don't know how good of a football coach he is. But the one thing that he needs to bring is some enthusiasm and some discipline to that program. And you get enthusiasm by winning some games early, and they have not been able to do that. They've always been a kind of a wonky region where they're with Chattanooga or with Nashville or whatever, and they just have not been able to generate the enthusiasm in Sparta like they have in the past. So by starting out against Cannon County, that's a team that's technically was 0-10, but they won 4 games. They used an ineligible player, so they had those 4 wins stripped away. So this is a very winnable game for Mark Frazier and White County. Now, what do they have coming back? I don't know, but what I do know is they're set up for success this year because they're not playing in a region, they're playing an independent schedule, so they're able to go out and play some of the smaller schools and some of the rivalry schools in the Upper Cumberland. You post a 5-5, 6-4 season in your first year at White County, you're going to be doing something.
And White County in Sparta, of course, there's great athletes. You see that in all the other sports. They just haven't played football.
Right.
And I think that's the biggest task for Mark Frazier, is to get the kids wanting to play football. He's done a good job of that so far. And yeah, I think it was a brilliant move by the administration to jump out and play a non-region schedule this year. It's a team that wasn't going to be a playoff contender, and they know that.
They're never going to be a playoff contender in the region they were in.
They absolutely weren't. So unfortunately, though, some of the teams on their schedule are pretty good in their own respects. I mean, Clay County's on the schedule. That's a pretty good 1A squad. We talked about them with Monterey's region, but 2 winnable games at the outset with Cannon County and then Cumberland County week 2, and we'll talk about that game next week. But it's been a long time since White County's had 2 very winnable games on the schedule to start the season. So things are looking up. They've got some athletes on that team.
They always have athletes. I mean, you look at White County, like you said, there's always good sports in White County. Baseball is always good. You've got basketball, it's always good. I mean, they always have good athletes, but it's just been football where it hasn't come together on the football field. They've had good athletes on the sidelines, on the field, but it hasn't come together as a team. And I think that's where Frazier can really pull them together and bring this team together. September 23rd, 2016, the last time White County won a game. It could be something new, a new dawn, a new era, 2019 for the folks there in Sparta. Looking at their schedule, like you said, they've got Cumberland County next week, and then they host CAK, of course, Cookeville. You got Walker Valley. You go to York, that's a tough game. You go to Livingston, that's a tough game. You host Clay County. You got Macon County and Goodpasture. So I do see some wins on this schedule for this team.
Yeah, and that's a thing for the first time in 2 years that we can say, hey, there's some wins at the outset for this team. If they can win one of them, hey, that's an improvement. They can win 3 or 4, things are definitely looking in the right direction for White County. So they get things started against Cannon County on Friday night. So now moving up to Livingston Academy, they host Westmoreland on Friday night. We'll be bringing you that game live on the Upper Cumberland Reporter. Pregame show starting at 6:45. Livingston's an interesting story last year. A lot of talent. There's a lot of optimism at the outset of the season, and then they were just riddled with injuries. They end up going 5-6, losing early in the playoffs. And this year the story is, hey, we got these players back. We got some kids with experience, but they have a brutal schedule this year. So the question is, how good can Livingston be given the talent but the tough schedule?
Well, I can tell you 5 and 6 is not acceptable in Hogeye country, whether you have injuries or not. I know Bruce Lamb, he does an excellent job. He's 79 and 77 overall in his coaching career. This team kind of reminds me of the 2005 team that went 5 and 5 in the regular season. Then they went on to win a state championship because their schedule was so brutal, but they had some great talent. They had a quarterback named Wilson Cates that they really got behind and that took them to that state championship. Oh, by the way, they've got 3 preseason all-state players on their team.
That's pretty good.
Coming into this season. So it starts right there with Will McDonald, a 6'2", 185-pound senior quarterback, started since he was a freshman. Now, this is what's mind-boggling is he could become Livingston's all-time leading passer this season. Now, you realize Brock McCoy has played there, Wilson Cates. Livingston has had some outstanding quarterbacks. This guy could become the all-time leading passer in Livingston history, so you know he is good.
Yeah, Will McDonald, they will go as far as he takes them, and that could be a very long way. And that's an interesting point about the 2005 season because there's some games that can be really tough to win. Yeah. And you look at the schedule, Upperman's on that schedule. They have their sights on making another deep postseason run. Cookeville is 6A school. Looking up there, they're obviously going to be better than they were last year. I think we both agree on that. I mean, they play York, who's another very good 3A squad. Yeah. Very tough offense to stop and a great defense. They're well coached. So it's not, they could go, it wouldn't surprise me at all if Livingston had a deep playoff run, but had quite a few losses in their regular season slate just because some of the playoff teams they'll face won't be as good as the regular season teams.
And they face them on the road. I mean, you know, after hosting Westmoreland, they host Cookeville, which, you know, obviously is going to be a tough game. Then they go to Upperman, go to Stone Memorial, and go to Smith County 3 weeks in a row.
And Smith County is up this year. Without a doubt, they're returning a lot of guys who played a lot last year and really started to put it together towards the end of the season. So that's not a gimme game for anybody on the schedule either.
No.
And you look at Friday night, Westmoreland coming to town. They're a 2A school, but they went 8-4 last year, lost in the second round of the playoffs to Watertown. Watertown, obviously, a historically great high school football team. Yes. So they're no slouch. This isn't a game that the Wildcats can just look over for Livingston.
No, they can't be looking past Westmoreland to Cookeville next week, that's for sure. This is a game they need to come out and just take care of business. But you know, besides McDonald, you also have 2 other preseason All-State players. You've got the Smith kid, Wesley Smith, 6'1", 170-pound senior wide receiver, and then you've got the defensive lineman Cole Spears, 6 foot, 280 pounds. All 3 of those guys, preseason All-State. You've got a wide receiver, you've got a record-setting quarterback, and you've got a guy on the defensive line. I like building a team around those 3 guys.
Absolutely. And if you have a quarterback and a great wide receiver, you're going to have the advantage on a lot of the defenses you face because they're going to either have to double cover that wide receiver, which leaves other people open, which they have plenty of weapons outside of those players. But like I said, they'll go as far as Will McDonald takes them, and having guys he can throw the ball to that are fully capable of being very good pass catchers is nothing but a positive sign for Livingston this year. So it's an interesting team.
Yeah.
It wouldn't surprise me if they win a whole lot of games. It wouldn't surprise me if they drop a few. But come playoff time, you can't sleep on the Wildcats.
No, this is kind of the wild card team. I mean, they could be 5 and 5 or they could be 10 and 0, and you'd be like, oh yeah, I can see that.
It makes sense.
Either way, but again, they have all the makings this year in Hogeye country to make a deep run in the playoffs. And really, if I had to go out on a ledge right now, I'd say that Livingston, it would be my pick to go the deepest in the playoffs of all the teams in the Upper Cumberland.
Well, we'll get to my pick in a minute here. Any guesses to who that is? Yeah. But now let's move on towards the main event of the week.
Oh, yeah.
And that is, one second.
We're at 15. I'm just letting you know.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
It's a perfect time for us to
take
it. All right, ready?
Yep.
We'll pick up with that. Ready?
Yep.
So now let's move on to the main event of the week. We are here, obviously in the background is Tucker Stadium. We're at Tennessee Tech tomorrow night, Thursday at 7 p.m. It's Cookeville against Upperman, a game between 2 teams that has quickly turned into a heated rivalry, especially given what happened last year. These teams don't like each other very much.
A lot of talk going on between Cookeville and Baxter right now. I mean, but you know, and that's what's good because there really hasn't been much of a rivalry between these 2 schools. You've got Upperman, which is a 3A school. You got Cookeville, which is a 6A school. And really, the rivalry used to be between Upperman and Monterey. Those 2 teams played more and really were closer in size, and so they had some great games. But now you've got Cookeville, and it's become a rivalry because what happened last year? Well, last year, Cookeville goes to Upperman and loses to the Bees 23-7. Now, before then, Cookeville had won 52-7, 48-0, and 34-26 under Jimmy Maynard. And so 3 lopsided wins, and then last year all of a sudden Upperman shows up, and of course we know what they did. They go 13-1, controversial loss at home against Alcoa in the playoffs. It was an onside kick, and so
they recovered the onside kick. They definitely recovered the onside kick.
So anyhow, so it has turned into a rivalry, and there's been a lot of talk, and I think that's one of the reasons why they moved it to Tucker Stadium is because you go to Baxter, it's standing room only, and they couldn't probably get everybody in. You go to Cookeville, it's standing room only, and they probably couldn't get everybody in. You go to Tucker Stadium, the seats 15,000, and play on a Thursday night. You're not only going to have all of Baxter, all of Cookeville, you're going to have Livingston, Monterey. You're going to have everybody who's been clamoring for football to start be at Tucker Stadium tomorrow night because it's a huge game.
Absolutely.
But football's finally starting. It's the first game of the season, and everybody is just ready for high school football.
Absolutely. And when you think about last year, it was obviously a big turnaround for Upperman.
Oh, yeah.
And in no small part to first-year head coach Adam Caine coming up from Sequatchie. And it is the Upper Cumberland Reporter Coaches Show. So I caught up with Adam Caine on the phone earlier today. We talked about the upcoming matchup and the atmosphere. Listen to that conversation now, and we'll be right back. I'm joined now by Upperman head coach Adam Caine, one day ahead of his team's big matchup with Cookeville. So, Coach, I guess the main question is 24 hours away from just over 24 hours away from your first game of the season. How are you feeling about your team?
Well, I'm going to be honest with you. At this point, it doesn't really matter how I feel about them because the one thing I can tell for sure is they are sick and tired of practice, and I think they're ready to, at least get a game under their belt. Now, whether that means we'll come out and play well, I don't know, but I know they're ready to do something other than listen to me holler and scream at practice.
Mm-hmm. And defensively for your team, you're going up against a quarterback in Stockton, Owen, a first-year starter. Not a whole lot of tape on him. You heard some things out of camp, but what kind of unique challenges does it present when you're going up against a guy who there's not a whole lot of tape on?
Yeah, there's really not much tape on anybody. We traded a quarter of a jamboree, and so I got about 12 plays. But we know he's very athletic. He's a big, strong kid. He made some plays in the passing game the other night. So I think he's a true dual threat guy. I know talking to Coach Maynard, everybody over there is very excited about him as a player. So, and I think Coach has been around long enough to he's not going to say that about just any old guy. So I'm sure he's going to be a stud, and, we got a work cut out for him as a runner and a passer trying to slow him down.
Mm-hmm. And then last question, two-part question for you. Tomorrow night's game, obviously, at Tucker Stadium. Big college stadium, supposedly going to be a big crowd, we hope. So first of all, what's your message to the community to get them out to that game? But then secondly, how do you go about keeping your kids calmed down going into an atmosphere like that? Some kids can get overwhelmed in an atmosphere like that.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to have to say much to the community. Just from what I've gathered, everybody's pretty excited about it. With the team, I do think it's important, game one, an in-county game. I don't know if I would call it a rivalry because I don't know that Upperman's won enough games in the series for it to be a true rivalry. But, we're going to try to, change that. But I do think it's important to, what I call settle into the game as quickly as possible. There's been a lot of back and forth on social media and the whole thing. And, when I was a player, there was no cell phones or social media, and that we had, only trash talking we could do was put a quarter in a payphone and call somebody, prank call them and hang up. But nowadays they're doing it while they're sitting in class. And so, I think you can get kind of overly worked up when that's the situation. So my big message to my team is get settled into the game and let's try to execute what we're trying to do.
Absolutely. Well, he is head coach Adam Caine over at Upperman. They get the season started tomorrow night against Cookeville, 7 p.m. at Tucker Stadium. Thanks, Coach.
Appreciate it.
Welcome back. Now, something interesting in that interview with Coach Caine, he talked about the atmosphere. You don't have to get the fans jacked up, and you mentioned that, it's going to be a huge crowd anticipated. It's being broadcasted all over the place by us, by you,
Yeah, everybody
by
and their
others.
brother is going to be broadcasting the game, I think. I mean, it's the only show in town.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it really is.
And so that brings up the question, and he talks about his kids need to get into the game. How important is that in this atmosphere for two teams, and who does that favor? Because, yes, Cookeville's a 6A school, but last year Upperman and these kids played in a lot of very big games. So how important is that to be able to get into the game?
I think it's very important for Upperman because they haven't played at a venue like Tucker Stadium. They've not played at the the bigger stadiums that has the open air and when you're in Baxter, the fans are right there on you. They're right there behind the bench. You can hear them. They're boisterous. I mean, the guys can hear their moms hollering at them, ringing the cowbells. I mean, it's very loud right there. You get in a stadium like this where you're sitting back farther and, even an Upperman crowd may not make as big of an impact, cheering-wise as they would at their home stadium. You go to Cookeville, it's a little bit different. The crowd is set back a little further. They're not used to, they're more used to a venue like this. And they've even played at Tennessee Tech, usually one game the last few years. So if there's an advantage as far as the venue goes, I have to give it to Cookeville High because they've played on Tech's turf before. They usually play at least one game at Tech every season. And their facility is a little more conducive to what Tucker Stadium is.
Yeah, I agree with you. The stadium is certainly more similar to a Cookeville, or you think they play the Murfreesboro schools, and those stadiums are huge.
Yeah.
I mean, they're more this size than they are in Baxter. But this team is in Upperman is very interesting because last year they were counted out in a lot of games. Right,
Yeah.
Early in the year they were counted out against Cookeville, then they were counted out against Livingston. And then you get into the playoffs, they were counted out against Red Bank, and they easily handled Red Bank. And then Alcoa, hey, a different call and an onside kick. They may be going to a state championship game last year. So it's a team led by Donovan McAllister that's shown that they are poised under pressure. They didn't hide away. They seemed ready for the moment.
Right.
And so this is just another one of those moments for them. And you get the vibe around the program that they got some unfinished business after what happened last year. And that starts tomorrow night against Cookeville. And so it'll be very interesting to see. I think we're going to get a good gauge on it in the first quarter if there's any sort of nerves given the moment or not. Ideally, neither one of them have very much nerves, and they go and put together the best game they can put together, but that doesn't always happen. So now let's look at these two teams. Let's look at the quarterback position first.
Okay.
For Cookeville, third-year starter Donovan McAllister, he's taken noticeable jumps from first year one to year two, and now year three, he's gained some weight, looked very good in camp. And then for Cookeville, it's Stockton Owen, first-year starter. Very similar in that they're both dual-threat guys. They're not afraid to run. How do you assess the quarterback battle?
Well, you got Donovan McAllister. He ran for over 1,500, or threw for over 1,500 yards and 13 touchdowns last year. Then he ran for over 1,100 yards and ran for 13 touchdowns last year. So he is obviously a dual threat. He makes the Upperman offense go. So Stockton Owen, he is a little bit older, a little bit more mature of a player as a junior. He was a starting quarterback in middle school. He came in, he immediately made an impact, kind of at a slot receiver, wide receiver, playmaker type position. He can run. He has an elusiveness about him that makes people miss. Now, can he throw the football?
Yeah.
That's the thing.
That's
That's the untested thing here is can he throw the football? He's got Braden Evans back, who was the leading receiver last year, so he has some targets to throw to. He's got Kedian. I can't pronounce his name, but I know who he is.
Yeah.
Anyhow,
He's got threats.
He's got some threats out there. What Cookeville High does have is Jacob Stamps.
Yeah.
And so last year, even against Baxter, he wasn't the starting running back because he had Jaden McAllister, but Jacob Stamps did have a 15-yard touchdown run in Baxter against the Bees. Now, when we talk about Upperman as a team, McAllister can make them go.
Yep.
When we talk about Upperman against Cookeville, let's just look back at last year, okay? You had Blake Metzger, 53-yard touchdown run. Blake Metzger, 3-yard touchdown run. All right, Cole Bush, 78-yard touchdown pass. Blake Metzger, Cole Bush are no longer on that team.
Absolutely true.
And that you're taking away 2,000 yards and almost 40 touchdowns out of that team that was very poised because when it came crunch time, you could give it to Blake Metzger.
Yeah, and that's the big unanswered question for me coming to Upperman because yes, Blake Metzger was arguably the best running back in the history of the Upper Cumberland. I mean, he's up there in the greats. He had a phenomenal season, set all sorts of records.
2,000 yards and 40 touchdowns, 39 touchdowns. That's crazy.
And Zach Stewart, who was the backup last year, is now the starting back there. He's not Blake Metzger. He can't be expected to be Blake Metzger. And in the words of Adam Caine, you're going to see a whole lot of less spin moves out of Stewart. But he's a capable back. You're going to see more 3- and 4-yard gains than you'll see the 75-yard gains. But if you think back to last year, Donovan McAllister, nearly every time he ran the ball, was going for 70 yards, right? You mentioned it. He had 1,100 yards. And when you have a guy like Blake Metzger, you don't have to go to a lot of different people. And you have a guy like Cole Bush, you can just throw it over the top. So the question is, how are they going to adjust the offense? Coach Caine told me they got to get more creative. I think that's certainly the case. You don't have guys on the outside who can just beat you down the field anymore. So you're going to have to be creative. They're going to ask Donovan to read defenses a lot more than he had to in the previous season. And so senior year, can he make that jump? He's a guy who wants to play in college. If he wants to do that, he's going to need to show the scouts that he can read a defense. So now let's talk about something you mentioned, Stockton Owen. Can he throw the ball down the field? And when you look at the Upperman defense, it was a great 3A defense last year, maybe the second best defense behind Alcoa in the state last year. They held Alcoa to their lowest point total, which is no small feat going against the Tornadoes. But the weak spot this year with the loss of Cole Bush and some other kids, Sidney Brewington, is the cornerback position. Yeah. And to be able to beat the Beast team, I think you're going to have to throw the ball down the field because the run defense is amazing. So the question mark for me for the Cookeville offense is, can Stockton Owen throw the ball down the field?
I think that's a good question. I think that's something that we'll find out tomorrow night because Cookeville High has a great offensive line. I mean, they have a huge offensive line. They are big. Even talking with Coach Caine, he talked about the size of Cookeville's offensive line. Now, size doesn't mean everything. You still have to block, all right? And you've got some linebackers for Upperman that are just incredible. They've got a great linebacking core. Jacob Dutch is one of the guys. Nick Stacy, Caden Nash, some of those guys. I could see them blitzing a lot and putting a lot of pressure on Owen. So you may looking for some quick passes from B.J. Billen. You may line up in the slot, and you just have to hit a quick out, or the tight end, Fort Hunter, coming off the line and hitting him real quick. One thing about that secondary, though, you got Donovan McAllister, who is a very good safety.
Absolutely.
He had several interceptions last year, so you can't get too crazy back there. You're not going to be able to throw the ball too far downfield because you got him roaming the outfield out there.
And he's a great safety. When he's listed as an athlete because he is fully capable of being an elite level safety in 3A. And you talk about the linebacking core and the battle on the lines, which is the biggest jump for me from the previous coaching staff to Coach Caine's coaching staff was on the lines. They went bigger, they went physical, and they hit people. They hit hard. And that's the thing that affected Cookeville last year is they hadn't been hit like that. You don't get hit during the fall.
You don't expect to get hit like that from Upperman. I mean, I'll just be honest because you look at the scores of the past games, 52-7, 48-0. I mean, you're not hitting anybody.
And if there's one thing I'm sure of is that this B team is going to be ready to hit somebody come Thursday night. And so, and you mentioned the blitzing. I think that's very true. I think in the first quarter, going against a kid that's never started at the high school level in Stockton Owen, yes, he's a great athlete and he can run, but I think Coach Caine's going to be dialing up the blitzes early in the game to try to get into his head. If they can get a couple of sacks early, we'll see how Stockton Owen responds to that, because if he decides he wants to just run and gets a little bit of happy feet in the pocket, I don't know if he can get very far against that linebacking core that they're going to be watching for that. They're going to be able, those quick out routes and slants, those are going to be very critical, and letting your receivers make plays on the outside, take those 5 to 10 yard gains, because quite frankly, it's very hard to run against this Upperman defense because of how physical they are.
Well, wait a minute there, McKay. You got to remember, Stockton Owen is a playmaker.
Yes,
so he can run and he can pass. And when you have the ability to roll out, and when you can pitch the ball, you might see some option stuff. But when you can throw on the run, and he's not a pocket passer. I mean, let's just put that out. He's not a pocket passer. He's not big enough to be a pocket passer, and it's not the style of runner that he is or the style of quarterback that he is. But he can move left, he can move right, and like I said before, he's got that elusiveness that he can run around long enough to get somebody open. So, and I think that'll be key.
It'll be interesting to see how the offense and defense adjust to each other, because there's going to be some unique things dialed up on both sides of the ball. No doubt going to be a great atmosphere.
Can't wait.
It's going to be an unbelievable game. You'll be on the call for 107.7 and 1400 The Hub. I'll be on the call if you want to watch it on Facebook Live on Upper Cumberland Reporter, pregame at 6:45. And hey, if you're coming out to the game, we've got a pregame tailgate party happening in the parking lot behind us right next to the tennis courts. Free snacks, free water. Yeah, absolutely. Free water, cornhole, 2 bouncy castles for the kids. One's going to be black and gold, and the other one's going to be red and white.
Awesome.
Free T-shirts. Going to be a whole lot of fun. So that starts at 5. If you're coming out, if not, make sure you tune into one of our broadcasts. It's going to be a whole lot of fun. Next Wednesday at 5 o'clock, we'll be here with another episode of the Upper Cumberland Reporter Coaches Show. Thanks to Buddy Pearson. It was a lot of fun today, episode 1. We'll see you all next week.